Hey, good morning, everybody. We're going to start our 103rd Santa Clara River Watershed Committee meeting. I want to thank you guys all for joining us today. Before we get started, can we please all introduce ourselves? If we could go around the room first, starting in that corner and kind of just work our way around. And you will use the microphone on your table.
Okay, yes, I can. Good morning, Tony Emmert with United Water Conservation District. I've been AWOL for at least 6 months, so my apologies, but glad to be able to be here this morning.
Good morning, Kelly Long, Ventura County Supervisor.
Good morning, Jordan Atmore. I work for the United States Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Morning, I'm Brooks Engelhardt with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Good morning, I'm Sean Hastings with NOAA's Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary.
And I'm Sachiko Lamen with Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary.
Hello, I'm Joe Cahill, the Executive Director of the Ventura Botanic Gardens.
I'm Heidi Ortloff. I'm one of the watershed coordinators.
And I'm Lauren Zaragoza, and I am another watershed coordinator.
And for our virtual attendees, if you could unmute yourself and introduce yourself. I hate to kind of pick on people, so if you guys feel comfortable, feel free to unmute yourself and give a quick intro.
I will start. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Vaughan-Hubert. I'm here with Vivian, Phan. We'll be presenting today regarding our master's thesis project here at UCSB today, and we're excited to be here and present. Thanks for having us.
I can go next, I guess. Tom Dudley with UC Santa Barbara. Next.
Hello, I'm Sarah Davis with the University of Michigan. We are master's students that are working with the Biosphere Network and the National Park Service.
I'm Elizabeth Burns from Southern Steelhead Coalition.
Hello, I'm Craig Riley, also a master's student with the University of Michigan.
Good morning, Cliff McCready, National Park Service. I'm the federal liaison to the U.S. Biosphere Network, of which Channel Islands is one of 28 internationally recognized biosphere regions in the United States. And I work very closely with two people you just met, Sarah and Craig.
Good morning, I'm Sean Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Clara River Conservancy.
I am Davina Schneider. I also work for the Santa Clara River Conservancy.
Hello, I'm Mark Reid. I'm a Master's of Landscape Architecture student at the University of Southern California.
Hi, I'm Edda. I'm also a part of the Santa Clara River Conservancy.
Hi, I'm Leah Mackler, and we are Hector and Leslie and I are part of the same group that Hannah and Vivian are at the BREN school at UCSB.
Good morning. Video out today. Rick Vasilopoulos with Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency, Water Resources Planner.
Morning, everybody. Jody Schweitzer, Water Program Director with the Farm Bureau of Ventura County.
Michelle Sevilla, Director of Communications for Assemblymember Steve Bennett.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Does anyone in the room have any quick update they want to give for their organization? Just really quick, not on the agenda. Anyone over Zoom? Does anyone want to just share anything really quickly?
If I could,
oh yeah,
this is Kelly Long, Ventura County Supervisor. I sit on the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, and we're doing our 5-year review plan. And we had one last night. We're having another one tonight. Just wanted to make sure people were aware of it. I know groundwater is so important to everyone. And then also I'm on the Fillmore Piru basins, GSAs, and we're updating. We have to do some updates on our GWR, and we have a meeting coming up. But just want to make sure everyone is aware that we're working diligently on those projects. And thank you for everyone's involvement too. Thanks.
Does anyone over Zoom want to just provide a update or a notice? Nope. Okay. Okay, so we are going to be, oh. Okay, so we're going to be starting with our first presentation today, which will be assessing riparian woodland response to shallow groundwater availability. This will be given to us by several UCSB BREN master's students. Presenters, you guys should be able to share your screen and we will see it projected on, you can't see it from here, but we have a large screen here projecting it.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and share my screen. So let me know if it is popping up on your end. It should be our title page.
We see it. Looks good.
Awesome. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and kick things off. So hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Vaughan-Hubert, and today I'm joined here with my team online, Hector, Leah, Vivian, and Leslie. And Vivian and I are excited to provide you all with some updates on the Santa Clara River regarding our master's group thesis project here at the UCSB BREN School of Environmental Science and Management. So our project overview is going to be quite brief, but we'll be providing some additional information and resources regarding the project towards the end of our presentation. So to start off, our project was specifically focused on assessing the East Grove riparian ecosystem located in the Fillmore subbasin to further understand the hydrological dynamics that impact the overall stability and health of East Grove, specifically following periods of drought from 2012 to 2015, where we then looked at shallow groundwater level responses to climate variability patterns during the early drought recovery period and into the wet year of 2023, with our main research question being centered around how groundwater flow and storage sustains plant transpiration at East Grove. And while our project assessed various factors such as the lithologic composition of our study area, the potential for rising groundwater through vertical hydraulic gradient analyses, shallow groundwater level responses to climate variability, and riparian vegetation responses to fluctuating groundwater levels using remote sensing, today we'll be focusing on these two methods today, starting with our assessment on shallow groundwater level responses at East Grove. So we were able to assess changing groundwater levels using data from a shallow monitoring network. And this includes about 21 wells and was installed towards the end of 2015 by a UCSB research team. And this recorded depth to groundwater measurements about once a month, providing data that stretched from early 2016 into March of 2023. And using this data, we created time series plots for each of these wells, as shown here. Just one example of one of the wells that we used, just showing precipitation, high precipitation intervals indicated by that light blue line, where depth to water measurements are indicated by those black dots as of a particular date. And this allowed us to observe patterns over their entire study period for each well and East Grove as a whole, and allowed us to see how levels were responding to high precipitation events, as you can see here by this jump where levels were recorded above the well casing at these monitoring wells, especially here at this well particularly at the start of 2023. So our main observations from this specific analyses were that groundwater levels had been shallowing in the East Grove area after the 2012-2016 drought into the early drought recovery period and into normal to very wet years. We also found that groundwater levels had variations in responses during and after wetter months, leading us to further investigate this relationship between water level rise and precipitation. And to do this, we started by combining the generated time series data from these monitoring wells with actual precipitation dailies. Here you can see a visual example of one of these wells and how we began to combine this data. And this was then followed by using RStudio to identify events of water level rise, where depth to groundwater levels went from local lows to local highs over a certain period of time. And the precipitation during this time was then summed, and this process was repeated for all 21 of those shallow groundwater monitoring wells and all water level rise events. And this resulted in a data set that we used. This data set was combined a total of 237 water level rise events and total precipitation. And to analyze this linear relationship between precipitation and water level rise, we applied Thielsen regressions in R to reduce the impact of outliers. This plot just shows how precipitation is correlated with water level rise events for one well particularly. However, this procedure was repeated for each of these wells and as an aggregate. Applying these methods, we found significant relationships between water level rise and precipitation for most wells. And while these results are what we would expect, that more precipitation leads to more water level rise, this essentially allowed us to quantify these fluctuating groundwater levels in the shallow aquifer as a response to precipitation. And in doing so, we found that groundwater levels are in some part related to precipitation, with the data suggesting that other factors were influencing water level rise events, such as runoff from local irrigation, which was not able to be assessed in the study due to data limitations. And these results then led us to investigate riparian sensitivity, so riparian vegetation sensitivity to these fluctuations in the shallow aquifer. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Vivian to discuss our remote sensing tool to assess the ecological responses at East Grove.
Hi, I'm Vivian, and to go further on about the remote sensing, we looked at Sentinel-2 data, specifically 20-meter resolution data, because we wanted to use the shortwave infrared radiation to assess how much water is within a plant, just to understand plant water stress. So to do this, we use the normalized difference moisture index, also known as NDMI. And as I said before, we use the shortwave infrared radiation band as well as the near infrared radiation. And then using these two wavelengths, we're able to calculate plant water content, and these values range from -1 to 1. And what this essentially means is that -1 has low water content within a plant versus values closer to 1 means that the plant has high water content. So it's just a difference between whether or not a plant is stressed. And specifically looking within East Grove, we looked at summer because that is when plants experience peak productivity within the area. And we chose to display these time frames, 2016 and 2021, because of their stark difference in average NDMI. So on the left side, you can see that the blue coloration is not as evident as in 2021 on the right side. And that's because in 2016, the average was 0.05, which is really low for NDMI. It indicates that plants are stressed, versus 2021's average is 0.26. So plant water stress was reduced. And this is just further showing how there's a difference between NDMI values between these two summers. And this is just another way to visualize the change in NDMI between 2016 and 2021. So values closer to red indicate that there is a decrease in plant water content, and values that are blue indicate that there's an increase in plant water content. And this is just zooming in again on the area of East Grove, showing that the plant water content increased generally within East Grove between the years 2016 and 2021. And if we, going further on with that, We were also comparing groundwater levels and NDMI values over time between the two, and we wanted to graph these on the same plot. So we did this by creating a scatter plot of all data points for each well, and each data point is 1 month for one well with an average depth of groundwater and median NDMI around the well for each month with the depth of groundwater data. And the regression line for this plot was calculated using rank-based estimation, and the linear relationship between these variables was found to be statistically significant. However, there's a weak negative correlation between depth of groundwater and NDMI. And to further investigate this relationship, we found that there is distinct seasonal variation in this data. And as you can see, there is clustering of data points by season. And as I said before, we wanted to specifically look at summer values because that is when riparian plants are experiencing peak productivity within the area. And by doing so, we found that there was a much stronger negative correlation between depth of groundwater and NDMI. So what this essentially means that is NDMI is higher when groundwater levels are shallower, especially during the summer. So how does groundwater flow and storage sustain plant transpiration in East Grove? So essentially, we only looked at the last two, which is groundwater levels rise after precipitation events and plant water content is higher when groundwater levels are shallow. We also looked at the first two, coarse material and upper layers, and also the upward vertical hydraulic gradient, but we're not discussing this today. And if you want further information about our project, you can find the information on the BREN website, and we'll also be presenting this Friday on April 26th at 5 p.m. And you can also find the live stream link on the BREN website as well. And you can also reach out to us through our emails here with our contact information. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? If you're in person, you can just unmute yourself. And yeah.
Hi, just a question. Since I'm on the GSAs, this is Kelly Long. Was wondering why the choice of analyzing this on a 5-year versus a 20-year? Only because the 2016 to 21 was more wet per se than the time frame that we have to pick for GSAs. And I know a lot of these studies are being utilized for analyzing with DWR and so forth. So just as a question.
Yeah, there are data limitations because Sentinel-2 only goes as far back as 2016, and we don't have previous data just due to the fact that the satellite didn't have data before 2016. And we chose Sentinel-2 because it had the highest resolution to get more accurate results.
Okay, great. And if you could put that in a footnote of your study, that would be wonderful. Just so if someone runs into this study, it's always helpful to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If you're joining us over Zoom, you can also raise your hand and I can call on you. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your guys' presentation. Very interesting. And we will, when we share the recording of this meeting, we will also include their contact information.
Thank you.
Next, we have a presentation on the Channel Islands Biosphere region from NOAA Sea Grant Fellow Sachiko Lamen.
Can you hear me? Is it working? Okay. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sachiko. I'm a California Sea Grant Fellow with Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. I'm here today also with Sean Hastings, and I'm going to be talking about the Channel Islands Biosphere region, which If you haven't heard about it yet, that's why we're here. We're trying to raise awareness about this pretty cool designation that we have, and also that you are currently a part of, whether you know it or not. So next slide. The purpose of this presentation is not only to spread awareness and explain what the Biosphere program is, but it's also to invite you all to join the Biosphere region and potentially take on leadership roles and help with the management and maintenance of this designation. So we'll come back to this slide again at the end of the presentation, but I just kind of wanted to set this out here before. So as I'm explaining, you can maybe start picturing yourself within the Biosphere region, seeing how you might be fitting into this. Next slide. So for a little bit of background, the Channel Islands Biosphere region is a part of an international program called UNESCO Man and the Biosphere. UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. And you may recognize this acronym and maybe are already thinking of other designations that you've heard of. Specifically, the Man and the Biosphere program recognizes areas where there's a high level of overlap of diverse biodiversity as well as human activity. And this is a little bit different than other designations like UNESCO World Heritage Sites, in that these regions are voluntary, collaborative, and non-regulatory, whereas World Heritage Sites are actually legally protected areas through international treaty. So biosphere regions are a little bit more flexible, and you'll see that as we talk about the Channel Islands Biosphere region and how it's evolved over time. Next slide. Oh, before I start talking about this, also the Biosphere program has over 700 sites around the world, and there's 28 sites in the United States. So it's a pretty awesome global program. But for some history about our own Channel Islands Biosphere region, we were one of the first designations in 1976. It was actually the Channel Islands National Monument, which encompassed Anacapa and Santa Barbara Islands. And then every 10 years, these sites are up for a periodic review. And so a lot can change in 10 years. And that also means that during these periodic reviews, changes can be made. So next slide. In 1980 and 81, the Channel Islands National Park and Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary were designated, encompassing the 5 northern Channel Islands. And so when the Biosphere region was up for periodic review again in 1986, it was expanded to encompass this area. And then next slide. Again, most recently in 2016, the boundaries changed again, expanding even more to encompass the coastal communities in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. So this expansion was also due to the fact that when we had submitted for renewal, the Man and the Biosphere program got back to us and they said, hey, this is Man and the Biosphere. Previously, we had only really encompassed the Channel Islands and Sanctuary, which doesn't have that much human interaction comparatively to other biosphere programs. And so the boundaries were expanded to incorporate more of that human component. And if you're looking at this map right now and trying to decipher what all these different blocks and colors mean, we'll get to that in a second. It has to do with part of the area criteria for the biosphere region. But before I get into all of that stuff, I want to go back to the guiding question of the Biosphere program. And that is, how can we reconcile the conservation of biodiversity, the quest for economic and social development, and the maintenance of associated cultural values, with the objectives being, how do we demonstrate approaches to conservation and sustainable development at local scales that can then be extrapolated out to larger landscape scales through information sharing and cooperation. And so the 3 functions of a biosphere region to kind of uphold all of this, next slide, are conservation, development, and logistics support. So I wanted to highlight here the development function. This is really what sets biosphere, man in the biosphere regions apart from other types of protected areas, is that there is an emphasis on sustainable human development within these protected areas. And so you can actually see these three functions reflected through the three area classifications that we're going to get into right now. So you can go to the next slide. So there's three area classifications in a biosphere region, which were all those different colors that you saw on the previous map. And we're just going to break them down here real quick. So you have your core area, your buffer area, and your transition area. And in the conceptual framework of a biosphere program, the core area is generally has the least amount of human interaction. It's highly protected. It's generally more pristine nature and wildlife in the area, maybe with opportunities for monitoring, research, restoration, things like that. Next slide. So what does that look like here in our Channel Islands Biosphere region? That's things like Channel Islands National Park, our network of state and federal marine protected areas, as well as the state parks and beaches up and down our coast. Next. Next is the buffer area, and you can see here, it's supposed to act as kind of like a buffer, enveloping the core area, but biosphere regions take form in many different ways. So it's not always as beautiful and simple as this picture, but in general, more human interaction, more activities going on in there, things like tourism, education, research, stuff like that. So next slide. In our own region, it looks like the kind of areas along the Gaviota coast and the rural lands surrounding Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, where you can go hiking in our national forests or go on tours in our sanctuary waters and things like that. And next slide. And the last area is the transition area, and this is kind of where you all really come in, as well as in the buffer area, but very much so in the transition area. These are places where there's lots of human interaction, doesn't necessarily have to have all of the activities within this area being totally fully sustainable. But the idea of the transition area is that these can be kind of laboratories from which we can model sustainable development initiatives and really kind of test what works, with the end goal being that activities will eventually become sustainable. Next slide. So in our region, it looks like the coastal cities of up and down our coastline, things like the Port of Wainimi, which is a recognized green port, or our farmlands that have amazing watershed councils to manage water and monitoring of runoff and things like that. And so next slide. To bring it all back together briefly, you have your core areas of conservation, your buffer areas that kind of protect the core as well as facilitate education and stewardship. And then those transition areas that can really act as important laboratories for designing and testing different types of conservation and development techniques. And I know that I just listed a lot of different things that are already happening in our biosphere region. You can see by this map, there's already lots of protection and different initiatives happening. So why do we need a biosphere region if all of these things are already happening here? Well, beyond just being a point of pride and international recognition, biosphere regions kind of have that international recognition like a national park has in the United States. But beyond that and all the tourism benefits that come along with that, biosphere regions can really act as an important kind of way to bring together different stakeholders and organizations that are already doing the work in our region and be able to catalyze greater projects for larger scale impact through networking, information sharing, and coordinated planning of events. And so it's not just our little biosphere region. Next slide. We're actually part of a larger network. So this is just the biosphere regions in California. And if you go to the next slide, our network in the United States. And you're also connected to a global network of over 700 locations around the world. And that kind of scaling is really what is a benefit of the Biosphere program, not only to our own initiatives here on a local scale, but also affecting larger global change. And so, next slide, to bring it all back together, what we're asking of you all today, or proposing, is for people to get involved in our biosphere region. Historically, this Channel Islands Biosphere region has been administered by the National Park Service and NOAA Channel Islands. But in the spirit of the Biosphere program, that's not really what's supposed to be going on. We're supposed to be incorporating our community members. And so we wanted to make this presentation today to extend an invitation to get involved in your Biosphere region. I'm still working on planning some workshops coming up, but the end goal is to actually develop a steering committee and set up a governance structure to kind of hand off or share the management and administration of the Biosphere region with the broader Santa Barbara and Ventura communities. And so at these workshops coming up, I plan to hopefully get everyone together to work to develop a shared vision for the Channel Islands Biosphere region, and collaboratively develop our own governance structure. When do we want to meet? How many seats might be on a steering committee, things like that. And this is all in preparation for the upcoming 2026 periodic review, which is on the table. And that's also a great opportunity to, again, further evolve our biosphere region. So the boundaries can change. We can add different types of priorities, maybe have a watershed perspective, things like that. So you go to the next slide. That is the end of my presentation, but if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. And also, please do reach out. You can email me. It's right there on screen. If you're interested in learning more about the Biosphere program, or if you would potentially like to get involved, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Great presentation. And the last one was a great presentation too. I forgot to say that. This is Kelly Long. Question I had, if you're looking at people to join a committee and so forth, what are you looking for and what kind of is the goal?
Okay. So, and Sean, feel free to jump in here if I miss anything, but we are hoping to develop a steering committee to kind of take over the ownership of the biosphere region. NOAA and the National Park Service would still be highly participatory partners, but having that increased capacity of a group of committed committee members to help set priorities, kind of create and facilitate meetings, maybe start fundraising to help fund projects that the Biosphere region is doing. We don't have a steering committee currently, and so that's what we're hoping to form.
And can you give me an example of maybe a project you would like to do?
Ooh, well, one thing that comes to mind is with the 2026 periodic review, I think it would be great to get community members together to kind of reevaluate what we want our boundaries of the biosphere region to be. If you can go back a couple slides to that map. One more, that one. Right there, yeah. You'll notice that the actual channel in between the islands and the mainland is not part of the biosphere region. And that was intentionally done back in 2016 because we had a lot of oil and gas development in the area. And so just didn't feel right to include that. It felt too unsustainable. But now with the decommissioning on the horizon, that is potentially something that we can work towards, kind of creating new boundaries to include that area. Also, getting other groups involved. There's more developments that have happened. The channel was recently designated a whale heritage area. So figuring out how we can kind of bring different partners to the table and maybe set goals for what do we want decommissioning to look like, or create a unified voice around kind of these new things that are going to be happening in our channel.
Well, besides oil and gas, there's some huge, amazing things that are going on for our Navy base. We have a missile range that's on one side. For that, we have ships that are going through at a slower pace, which we need to have. And we work with Air Quality Control Board for the county. We have our Navy base. We have our Port of Hueneme. We have a very large fishing industry that goes on here. And then we also have some amazing environmentalists. We have county things that are going on. So that's why I was asking, is trying to understand what reach of people and community members you are looking for.
Okay, yeah, no, that's
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Because I think what you might come up with might be one aspect versus really looking at our team approach for the county's perspective of all that's working on here. So I just thought I would bring that up as to thought processes of who you outreach to, because maybe this isn't on people's radars. So I just wanted to thought. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. That's kind of a big part, is that we want to spread as far and wide. We've been making these presentations for a while now, just trying to raise awareness as much as possible and gather as diverse a group of stakeholders as we can. And the cool thing about this biosphere region and where we are right now is that those priorities are really up for debate, and they can be shaped by whoever ends up being a member or steering committee member of the Biosphere region. It's a great opportunity.
Got a question for you. The different biosphere regions around the country, are all those under National Park Service and other federal agencies, or just this one here?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in general, biosphere regions in the United States are generally around other national park areas or protected places. Who specifically is kind of like the administration power, I'm not exactly sure. I do know that for example, the Golden Gate Biosphere Network up north was previously very much, the National Park Service was very involved. And they just kind of went through a process that we are currently just starting. And they did this whole thing where they also reached out to a bunch of stakeholders and built their steering committee and network. And so they're still sort of in that phase. The national park is involved, but they are starting to incorporate more community members as well.
Hey, Sachiko, this is Cliff. I could jump in here if you want.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for the question. 21 of the 28 biosphere regions are associated with a national park as the core area. But the other 7 don't have a significant national park system site. So it's a combination of different partners. And as Sachiko explained, we're just acting as a catalyst here, we being NOAA and National Park Service, to bring in the larger community to take advantage of this unique geography. We don't own it. It's not ours to own, it's yours. And so that's the message we're delivering is with this invitation.
Elizabeth, you can unmute yourself over Zoom.
Whoops, I was knocking over my tea. Sorry about that. I wanted to ask more what would be, so the watershed that I cover is in the Ventura area. What would that entail in its, like, being a part of the transition area? So I know, I kind of understand what you guys would be doing for national parks and the channel, but for these transition areas, how would this program affect these, or try to affect these areas?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And my answer is that it's this is a voluntary management program. So members of the biosphere region would be able to get together and kind of brainstorm what are the issues that they care about and what types of actions do they think are important to take. And then come together using a unified voice to try to pull together potentially other watershed groups in this area that could then take collective action to kind of determine what it is that you want to do. I think the Biosphere region is a great place to kind of come up with ideas, to discover issues maybe that weren't on your radar, but also to gain a more holistic understanding of ways that you can come to solutions. So sometimes when you're just working in your own little bubble, you're so focused on the issue and what your solution is that you're working towards that it's hard to kind of see a broader perspective. And I think that's a great benefit of the Biosphere region that it can provide.
One more quick follow-up question to that. So you said that San Francisco they completed this process or they're in the middle of this process?
I believe that they are just a few steps ahead of us in this process. So they have created a steering committee and they are, I think, in the process of creating their management plan. I say in quotations because, again, this is a voluntary kind of program.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions? You can raise your hand over Zoom if you do. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before our next presentation, I wanted to mention that the California Department of Water Resources was planning on coming today, but they ended up not being able to. But they're updating their California Water Plan, and they wanted me to refer this group to their April 29th Zoom webinar, and it's going to provide an overview of the plan. And there's also a section for attendees to provide any feedback or ask questions specific to our watershed or specific to the plan as well. So I'm going to send the link to that Zoom webinar for you all to register to. Yeah, thank you. Sure. And next, we will have a landscape architecture master's student from USC named Mark Reid to talk about his project on seed dispersal in the Santa Clara River watershed. Mark, are you on Zoom?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Go ahead and screen share whenever you're ready.
Great. Okay. And you can see the presentation okay?
Yes, everything looks good.
Great. So my name is Mark Reid. Like Lauren said, I'm a second-year Master of Landscape Architecture student at the University of Southern California. And our studio this semester is a climate studio, and the topic is waste. So we're looking at landscape futures through the scope of waste. And some of my classmates have taken that very literally and gone down the recycling route, and mine is a little less straightforward. I'm looking at ecological wastelands and what happens to landscapes when forests are removed, when trees are removed. And you'll have to bear with me because it starts at the global scope and then eventually I get to the Santa Clara River. So my question that I'm asking is, in a world where 2,400 trees are cut down each minute, how can the approaches to deforestation change from wasteful exploitation to altruism in a way that transfers agency back to the trees? So this was my first project for this studio. It's a global study on forest loss from 2000 to 2022. All of the red that you see is trees that have been lost in that 22-year period. And the blue is the level of severity as of the last couple of years. So the main reasons for forest loss are industrial agriculture, timber logging, mining, expansion of infrastructure, and climate change. Unfortunately, a third of the world's 60,000 tree species are endangered. With industrial agriculture alone, palm oil plantations cover 66 million acres and cattle pastures cover 111 million. And that takes up about 80% of this forest loss. We're losing 2,400 trees a minute, equating to an area the size of Belgium every year. So this project was really tugging at my heartstrings, and the idea was to start at the global scale and eventually land on a site. So in order to do that, I brought it to Southern California, and I focused on the ways the seeds are spreading and how a healthy forest is able to have its seeds spread naturally, whereas a phantom forest, like the board before, is planted by man and often only single species, and for human benefits such as logging and the lumber trade. And eventually that theme of waste comes back into play because a monocropped landscape forest lacks that biodiversity. So the lens that I'm viewing my project through is a healthy forest prevents ecological wastelands from occurring, and I would like to bring that back to Southern California where we're losing it. So on this map, you can see in red, the deep red, the same data that I showed before, where we've lost trees primarily to wildfires in our case. And then the pink is agriculture today. The white squares and then the border around it is a study that I did specifically on the coast live oak, the Quercus agifolia tree. And through all of this mapping, I determined the forces that are at play for seed conveyance. So there's 5 forces primarily: barochori, which is through gravity; balochori, which is through force; zoochori is animals; anemachori is wind; and hydrochori is water. So I began overlaying all of this for Southern California and trying to identify nodes of interest that were crisscrossing different parts of these and incorporating more than just one. And I eventually landed on the Santa Clara River watershed because it incorporates all of these ways that seeds travel in a way that regions or in a way that spaces in the other parts of Southern California do not. On the left, you can see the section from the Mojave Desert to Ventura and the ocean, the Santa Clara River and the valley that it goes through. And because of my finding of this valley and its interest in seed conveyance, I ended up traveling the entire 84 miles of the river and taking photos and taking audio recordings. Here's a model of that same drawing on the right that I showed you before. And on the left is what we've called a PhotoWorks study to better understand the region that we're interested in. On the left is panoramic photos that I took. I stopped at 4-mile intervals, tried my best to get as close to the river as I could, but in some instances I simply couldn't, which I thought was interesting because this river is one of the, as you all know, you know a lot more about the river than I do, and I've really enjoyed learning so far of the research that you presented. But the river is one of the last few almost fully naturalized rivers in California, and it was really exciting to experience being near the LA River every day. The difference, it reminded me of being back home in Ohio, and it was very exciting. And I knew that there was more to this river than it had potential to bring back some of that historical trees that were present before. And I could tell that based on my audio recordings, the seed conveyance methods that I had studied were true. At the top is near the Mojave Desert, and the wind from the Santa Ana winds, it wasn't a Santa Ana wind that day, but I could tell that based on the geography of the valley that you can see on the model, follows that same direction. And so I began looking at focus on the 3 methods: animals, wind, and water, that seeds are conveyed. And I did studies based on specific species that are native to the river itself. I zoomed in to an area in the middle of the river near Fillmore just to get an example of species that used to be there, such as oak woodlands, riparian woodlands, and submerged woodlands. So the oak woodlands on the left, primarily it's scrub jays and western gray squirrels transfer and bury acorns of the oak trees between September and December, which is also when Santana winds flow through this region. And I mapped the ranges of those animals and compared it to the ways that oak trees would spread and in a clustered form versus in the center. This would be the western sycamore and white alder trees, which are more riparian, and wind affects those sycamore seeds as they spin through the air. And then on the right is hydrochory, so that's our Fremont cottonwood and willows that are having their seeds spread through water, which flows to the west. So I was mapping the patterns and taking a look at which plants beyond those trees would help to create not that same monocultural forest of just one or two species planted, but an entirely healthy, biodiverse landscape of trees and more. And the idea of succession has arrived here. I've created a plant list of about 90 species, 30 per category. And my idea would be to find areas along the river that have a lack of trees that were previously there and place seed bombs of these seeds and let nature do its thing and have these seeds arrive. So this graphic is showing saturation and growth rates. So as you spin closer and closer to the center, you're getting to the wetter areas. So it goes from oak woodlands and the dry area to the willows in the middle of the river in the center. And this is a study that I did to show that the growth rates of these three categories are different. So oaks grow at about 2 feet per year, along with sycamores being a little bit more, but then willows and Fremont cottonwoods can grow up to 20 feet per year. So that difference is also important to understand. And I'm still in the middle of my semester right now. The end goal of the design has not been fully realized yet, so I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about my project, but I will show you more photos of when I was traveling along the river, and I'll try to make it quick because I have a lot. So this was the start up just to the south of Palmdale. And I'll just quickly go through these. So this, I discovered where the start of the Santa Clara River begins. And this was the bed, it was dry. This day, I believe, was March 14th, and it was a rainy day in the second half of the day, but in the beginning it wasn't. I came across a poppy field. Here I'm driving west, and I reached a point on the river where it was very accessible and open. I could be standing directly in it. Here's willows that I was presenting on earlier. So this region on the eastern side is a lot more forested. And then here's the rain coming in. I'll just quickly go through these. But as I said before, coming through this region after living in Los Angeles for 3 years and not getting a chance to explore much was really exciting. And I am falling in love with this river, and I'm so excited to be here today to share my project. Here is an area closer to Santa Clarita. And I'm just traveling along, trying to access the river as close as I can. Like I said before, here's from a bit further away. But it was a really fun day from, I believe, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., a full scavenger hunt. And I would encourage you all to do this if you can get a chance. And here is closer to where my study area began, when the amount of trees became, they disappeared, basically. Oops. And here's also when the rain was starting to get more intense. I was fully drenched in the second half of the day. So as I'm approaching a final design, my idea is to incorporate the methods of seed conveyance in those patterns, and the end goal is to create a tree sanctuary for this region, with the goal of the efforts of this tree sanctuary to be spread throughout the rest of the river and the watershed. And here's the end of the day. in Ventura. And there's my email if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. We do have a question in the chat from Kat Salm from the Nature Conservancy. Do you have historical ecology evidence of more prevalence of Quercus species and their dispersers in the watershed?
Yes. So one of the parts of my initial research was looking at the historical ecology of the river itself, and my findings were there was pockets of oak woodlands all along the portion of the river that is between, I believe, Santa Paula and Santa Clarita. So that was really exciting to see, and it was mostly in areas where the city of Fillmore today currently was entirely in oak woodland previously, versus the strips of sycamore riparian forest and then willows in the river. Those were all present, scattered across different parts of that landscape. And it was a study done, I believe, in 2011, I think, with an organization from Ventura County. And I'd be
Thank
happy
you.
to share that too. Sorry.
Oh, and I was gonna say thank you. I think it was a little hard to see the plant species listed, but I was looking closely on your slides. But yeah, thank you so much. Did you have something else you were gonna say?
No, but I can go back to the any slide that you would like to see. I also should note, like, the plant species, it was so hard to narrow down, and my professor was like, why do you have 90 plants? That's so much. But a lot of it was because a plant like Claytonia is an indicator species of a healthy oak woodland. So if I include that in the seed bomb and it's successful and survives, that's an indication that the landscape is working. And I tried my best to focus on those plants that are making an effort. Another one would be poison oak in the riparian area feeds western gray squirrels and scrub jays, and that would be helping spread those acorns more and increasing the amount of trees.
Amazing. I'm going to open it up to the in-person audience here for any questions. Sure, go ahead, Monica.
Hi, I'm Monica Mathews. I am an ecologist at the Ventura County RCD, and I'm curious if this design would be accompanied with any other management strategies. Specifically, of course, I'm sure for a lot of people on the talk, introduced species and removal of them comes to mind, but there would be other management practices I'm sure you'd be interested in employing that aren't related to that. So I'm just curious if there are any things like that you have in mind for this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of my goals for the tree sanctuary would be to have it be functioning almost like a park as well. So I would want it to have recreation, and a part of that too is education. And what comes with that is also management of the landscape itself, and hopefully to have full-time staff at the site. This is also a really futures-oriented studio that I'm in. So the end goal, the design would be in 2100 because of the length of time that the trees grow. So it would be definitely a work in progress, but management is a huge concern. And while I haven't looked into specific agencies that would be working on that, I would love to know if you have any in mind. The idea of having multiple people fully on staff to ensure that the species are introduced properly and invasives are taken out is definitely on the mind.
Great, thank you. Any other questions in person? Sure, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This is Kelly Long. A great presentation. I totally can understand the seed bombs. It's really interesting, the Santa Clara Valley, because we will have trees and then big storms come, big flows of water, and then those trees are gone. And then some bushes, and you know, I'm very much would rather not have invasive species, but actual natural. If you could take the redunda away, I'd love that. Just as when you're, maybe it could help you to break down your seeds so there's not as many choices, really trying to be what that climate is and maybe what the natural plants in that area are, at least maybe break it down historically for 20 years or so forth. Just interesting information, but I liked how you want to keep Santa Clara Valley so beautiful. So I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, one of my favorite parts of this project is the idea of giving agency back to the trees. So as trees fall, as trees die, as more trees grow, the idea that I'm working on now is how do I map pathways through the landscape that change? And if a tree falls, I'm not going to cut that log for the pathway. I'm going to move the pathway for the tree. So that idea is very important to me and is the crux of my project. So thank you.
Do we have any other questions in the chat or in the Zoom? Okay, I will read some of the comments from the chat. Mark so this is from Sean Kelly from the Santa Clara River Conservancy. Great study and presentation, and they would love to post your final study on their website, so they included it in the link. And if you don't get that, I can send it to you. And Kat said that there are oaks on the properties towards the end of Fillmore Piru Basin. And Bruce, or from Stillwater Sciences, sent the historical ecology study. Thank you, everyone, for these links. And one more link.
Thank you all so much. I'm reading the chat now too. I'll respond.
Great, no problem. Thank you so much, Mark. It was great having you. And next we have Monica Mathews from the Ventura County Resource Conservation District talking about fire and watersheds. Thank you, Monica. I'll pull up your presentation. Mark, do you think you can stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sorry.
All right, good morning. Thank you for having me. And I'm Monica Mathews. I am the conservation ecologist at the Ventura County Resource Conservation District. I also coordinate our Ventura County Prescribed Burn Association, which has been a really fun and interesting and educational role for me. Today, we're going to talk about fire and land management practices and how they intersect and impact watershed health. So we'll cover, to start with, history of land management and fire, specifically in California, though many of these concepts and ideas apply statewide, worldwide, nationwide, and then we'll talk about how fire impacts watersheds, some of the strategies that we at the RCD and with the PBA are employing today, and again, these do expand to statewide and so on and so forth, and then what our pathway forward will be. Next slide. So to start with, history of fire and land management, specifically in California. Next slide. So we're going to go almost all the way back, pretty far back, 19,000 years, to an event that prehistorically in the context would actually have a lot of similarities and parallels with where we are today. There was a mega herbivore die-off that resulted in hazardous fuel loads, which likely resulted from climate change, and so mixed with climate change, put our early human ancestors in a very similar situation with hazardous fuel loads and unpredictable climate events. This is believed to have resulted in some of the first use of fire in this region, specifically in the Americas. A little bit different fire history in Eurasia and Africa and Australia, but this is believed to be the first application of fire in the Americas. Next slide. And so this is accompanied with some of the first arrival of early humans, specifically in our region in Central and South Coast California. Pretty much upon arrival, at least 14,000 years ago, early humans were using fire to manage the land. This comes from storytelling that is located in the Western science paradigm, but it is also located in indigenous stories and belief systems and indigenous ways of knowing throughout California, throughout United States, throughout the world. Next slide. And so this is a hugely generalized summary of some land management practices that have been used, again, for millennia, for tens of thousands of years. Coppicing is a broad term for lopping or trimming, basically removing vegetative material either to use it for something else, to make like a cradle board or a table, or to scatter on the land, maybe to add fuel to, say, for example, a fire that you start, which also is a land management practice that has a number of benefits. And then last but not least, of course, many would be familiar with the activity of planting and seeding, either for agronomy or for restoration, for all of the above, anywhere in between, so on and so forth. Next slide. And so now we'll talk about how fire impacts watersheds. Next slide. So these are some ways of describing fire. Fire intensity describes fire behavior, which essentially describes the amount of heat that the fire is producing. A hotter fire is going to move faster across the landscape. It'll have longer flame lengths. Cooler fire will move more slowly. It'll have a longer residence time. And so speaking broadly, fire ecologists understand fire to have a kind of balance. If it's hotter, if it's more than 400 degrees, it can have an adverse impact on soil structure, soil microbes, but it's moving too fast to really have any real impact. Colder fire will sit longer, but since it's too cold to really have any impact on the land, there's a balance there. We're starting to see fires that are hot and have a long residence time, and this results in a really high burn severity. When we talk about burn severity, we'll either be talking about vegetation, meaning a lot of the vegetation was oxidized into the air in the form of smoke, or we'll be talking about soil. So soil microbes might have died off. It does also relate to vegetative material that was in the soil, so like root systems that were oxidized into the form of smoke. And we are seeing examples of fire having adverse impacts on soil. Next slide. So Thomas Fire and Woolsey Fire, for example, really had what you might consider a minority of adverse burn severity. But when you consider the fact that, for example, the Thomas Fire impacted about 280,000 acres, 10% of that is still 28,000 acres that had adverse impacts on soil resulting from how hot the fire was and how much it sat in one place. So this resulted in the mudslide that killed 21 people, in addition to the 2 people that directly died from the fire, which of course is an incredible tragedy. These kinds of mudslides also do have adverse impacts on our watersheds, dumping soil into our waterways in amounts that our watersheds are not really equipped to handle. Next slide. So this is a quote from a study that came out last year that was written by a large group of fire ecologists, fire scientists, all kinds of scientists and fire experts. And essentially it found that our future for fire, especially if unmitigated, will have hugely adverse impacts on our watersheds. And the mudslide in Montecito would be an example of such an adverse impact. Next slide. So today we are using a number of land management practices, educational programs, and community engagement opportunities to mitigate for these impacts on our watersheds in ways that are meant to care for landscape level ecosystems and human built communities. Next slide. So these are some of our partners and some of the members of what is called the Ventura County Wildfire Collaborative. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this program and this group. We are composed of 4 fire safe councils in Ventura County, and then also Ventura County Fire Department essentially provides subject matter expertise and a million other opportunities and programs and help and support for this. Jensen Hughes is an industry partner, and then of course the Ventura County Resource Conservation District is also a partner. Next slide. This is a slightly less official, more kind of amorphous group of people that nonetheless provide immense and invaluable support for our Ventura County Prescribed Burn Association programs. We partner with Cooperative Extension on research projects, Surefire Training, and Working on Fire USA provide training opportunities. Ojai Valley Land Conservancy lets us apply fire to their land, which is a hugely invaluable contribution to the future of fire. Consumer Fire also provides equipment and personnel, and Ventura County Fire has been an invaluable partner through the whole process of building this program. Next slide. So again, we've come back to our land management practices, but today we've added one more. Next slide. And that is prescribed herbivory. We now, because we have unfortunately done a bit of a number on our native grazers and our native browsers, we have to supplement our landscapes with animals like goats, sheep, cattle, which of course do serve a purpose for us as well as animals that eat other animals, but also we need grazers and we need browsers out there for our ecosystems to remain intact. So this is a new and very much still evolving practice, like pretty much all of the practices that I'm going to talk about. Next slide. So today we do use prescribed herbivory. I'll talk about some of our grazing operations that we partner with. This is a practice that again is very much still in development, but has been shown to have positive impacts in regards to reducing hazardous fuel loads and restoring the land. Still a lot of very cool science in progress to assess how effective these practices are. Next slide. These are some of our grazing operations and really only some examples. Sorry that those letters got cut off there, but I'm sure you can still read it. Shepherdess Land and Livestock is a great grazing operation run by Cole Bush. They also partner with Dylan and then also with Michael Light. These are all independent grazing operations that also do partner with one another and with us. Next slide. And of course, we are applying fire to the land. We did 3 prescribed burns last year, and it is worth noting that there are a number of land management practices that involve using fire. Prescribed fire is one such practice, and it is the one that, or one of the ones that is located within the Western science paradigm. There's also cultural fire, indigenous fire, good fire, all essentially similar terms for indigenous use of fire. And these do lean on one another and borrow from one another. Prescribed fire borrowing more from indigenous fire practices than the other way around. Next slide. We do provide a number of educational opportunities, and also I get to benefit from those oftentimes by getting training myself for becoming a better fire practitioner and fire ecologist. But we do HIZ assessments, home ignition zone assessments, which also are called home hardening. We also work with a number of organizations like Pleasant Valley Rec to provide fire ecology and in general ecology programs. And we put on last year the California Wildfire Conference, which we feel was a great success and was really fun to put together. And then, of course, also, like I said, we provide a number of training opportunities for fire practitioners to get their certifications and to continue to grow and learn and be a student of fire. Next slide. And also, of course, given where we are, even with all of the knowledge that is absolutely available from Indigenous communities and nations, there are still a number of situations we find ourselves in that warrant further research, especially when it comes to introduced species. So we are currently in the process of monitoring the steelhead prescribed burn. Steelhead Preserve is in Lower Ojai Valley, so not quite in the Santa Clara River Basin, but we do hope to expand those research opportunities to assess, for example, impacts of the South Fire on South Mountain and other further research. The Fuel Management Strategies is a program that I recently applied for funding for that would be located in the Santa Clara River Valley. Next slide. And so we also mainly lean on our partners. These are not projects or plans that the RCD has produced, but we do have excellent partners that we lean on for producing community wildfire protection plans, vulnerability assessments, and a regional prioritization plan for the county at large that will definitely, among other things, assess vegetation and other aspects of vulnerability within the Santa Clara River watershed. Next slide. So the path forward, where do we go from here? What do we prioritize in building these programs and in working alongside community? Next slide. So first and foremost, well, maybe not foremost, but absolutely a major priority is building these programs alongside community, not presuming that you as an ecologist or me as an ecologist knows best or knows more than any community member, ensuring that your projects account for what community has expressed a need for, and equally ensuring that your projects and your programs prioritize underserved communities. Next slide. Equally prioritizing justice and equity, for lack of a better term. We still live in a world in many ways defined by gatekeeping certain programs, certain opportunities from especially first stewards of this land. And I do feel that we are at a moment in time when collaboration is becoming very real, is impacting the land in very positive ways, which is very exciting to see and to be a part of. This photo is an example of one of those collaborations. This man is starting the first fire for the first fire applied in collaboration between Santa Ynez Chumash and the Santa Barbara County Fire Department, which is pretty exciting. Next slide. So this is a video that I will request that my colleagues play that is about using fire in Southern California by Indigenous nations from this region. Go ahead. I think it does have enough language. To people watching online, we're trying to figure out how to make it so that you can actually hear the audio. Troubleshooting in progress.
Sacred. It is who we are as a people.
We'll restart the video.
A lot has gone dormant. I'm not going to say extinct, because we are alive. And that knowledge, like an ember, can be reignited again. It is up to each and every one of you to bring that knowledge back.
Not only just in our tribal communities, but across federal, state, local agencies, you know, the Indigenous people need to be represented in all spaces as the original stewards of, you know, the land that we all live on.
What we're trying to do is bring back fire to our tribal lands again, where we manage the land for different reasons, of course, for different plants and medicines that we utilized.
It's not just about climate change. It's not just about fire. It's cultural revitalization that'll heal us. That's what we're doing here. We're bringing it back. You know, we're revitalizing our spirits through our culture, through our languages, through our, you know, land management and stewardship. And that's what the fire within me and the fire within us means.
And our word for our soul, our spirit, is called Mathews. And what Mathews means, it means the fire within our body. When we say hello in the Ipai Kumeyaay language, we'll say Hauka. And what Hauka means is may that fire in your body continue to glow brightly. To us, fire is sacred. It is who we are as a people.
Okay, thanks for bearing with us, and I hope you enjoyed that. I'm excited for that full documentary to come out. The last items on my to-do list to discuss briefly are ways to restore resources to Indigenous communities, and this is really throughout California. That does say acknowledge rent, not acknowledgement. It is a play on words, of course, that is a way for you to kind of pay rent for living on Indigenous land. And this is for Southern California. Next slide is more for the Bay Area, though this is something you can pay if you are interested. The Sogoreate Land Trust is an excellent organization that does really good work. So they are definitely worth donating to. And next slide. And last but not least, these are some of the organizing people, both for the video that you watched and also just for land management in Southern California in general. The Climate Science Alliance does excellent work and has a tribal working group made up of Indigenous land stewards who are really doing exciting stuff, including giving a talk in a panel in the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force recording that I included in that QR code. The whole thing is definitely worth watching, but our cultural fire stewards are on the panel at hour 3 to hour 4, if you're interested. And I believe that is it. So thank you for your time. And if you do have questions, feel free to ask. Yeah.
This is questions by Kelly Longday. This is a great presentation. I really appreciate it. We're really trying to keep the soils healthy so the plants will grow and the environmental thrives. I really liked the idea of the herbivores. We've seen that really working. And it's interesting when you talk to our farmers and those who have really worked the land, how for the last 150 years, we had cattle and we had the grazing. And so much of the fire wasn't, we weren't in the same situation we are today. And so I appreciate you utilizing that as a source of success. The question I had is when you look at our fire maps, you have the last 20 years, CAL FIRE looks at it because we're looking for home insurance and all these different things, and home hardening is the big term now for mitigation, so they don't drop our insurance rates for our farmers, our cities and area. What have we done to look at the Fillmore, Piru to Santa Clarita Valley area? I think that's one of the last of burning in the last 8 years or 16. And just how do we get ahead? You know what I mean? Because we have to rotate and make sure that our land is being managed well. But what for those that haven't really burned in the last 16 years, is there anything that we could be doing ahead of it to really try and keep healthy soils, especially because it all drains through Santa Clara Valley and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as landscape, so not speaking to built environment, I would say look at the way that plant composition has evolved, and kind of like we've already a little bit discussed, what introduced species are becoming more and more dominant and what that trend is. We've all probably are aware of the way in which, at least to a degree, the way in which arundo being dominant in our landscapes can have a huge impact on wildfire. So those arundo removal projects, which we all probably keeps us up at night to a degree. I think we appreciate the value of those projects, and prioritizing them is valid and is important. I also personally think that there is an evolution taking place in how we relate to what plants are there in general, not just arundo and not even just all introduced species, but annuals versus perennials. How do we transition away from having to come back year to year to reduce the fuels for landscapes that have come to be dominated by annual grasses mainly? So I think there is a lot of land management practices that can evolve and will come from collaborating between Ventura County Fire, for example, and land management programs and organizations. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how that all evolves. I think it's something that is taking place like today as we speak.
I really appreciate it, because there's legislators that are passing bills and all these different things. And I just want to make sure that we're doing practical experience and really sharing that, because I don't think anyone likes that Ventura County's been in disasters for this long and so many fires. So anything we can do that and keep the air quality up and the land good, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. And not that this applies to watersheds per se, but I do also think the home hardening, which is also still something in evolution, to be fair, but I do think getting ahead of that with areas like Fillmore and Piru, and doing the educational parts as much as opportunities arise is also important for human safety. Yeah.
You had mentioned that there were 3 prescribed burns that you were part of this year. Where were those? And sort of, I think most of the places I've heard of that there were proposed prescribed burns, there's a lot of maybe fear and, by those that are in the neighborhood, and, people just are afraid that that's going to get out of control. And so is there an example that you could share of one of those that on, how that was successful and sort of how the community was involved in it?
Absolutely. So Ventura County Fire has, invaluable probably doesn't match the reality. It's beyond that. Has been a guiding light in designing and preparing and executing our prescribed burns so far, and in general, trainings and other elements of the Prescribed Burn Association. And so 2 of those burns were in Ojai Valley, in Lower Ojai Valley near Casita Springs, kind of neighboring properties. They were a little bit treated as the same burn to an extent. And then the 3rd one was near Fillmore, just southeast of Fillmore at the fish hatchery. And that was done with CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and again with Ventura County Fire, and a number of other partnering groups for all of those fires, really, all of those burns. And We did, door knocking campaigns and have done a number of educational programs to communicate with the surrounding area, so that people can have some context for why we're starting these kinds of projects and programs. All three of those burns went really well. Pretty much. Were incredible learning opportunities. We're very successful. In the case of the one that was at Steelhead Preserve near on Santa Ana Road, we are assessing essentially how fire can be used to kind of reset the land in a sense. That area has a huge yellow star thistle population and is also largely impacted by another species in the same genus. And so we're trying to see how using fire and especially coupled with seeding, how much that actually can reduce the introduced Centaurea species populations. So there are a lot of things that are involved in that as far as community organizations and just private citizen community members as well. Yeah.
Hi, Sean Hastings with Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, and you're the reason we're here today for this biosphere region concept. And for 40 years, it's been an offshore biosphere region focused on the islands. And when in 2016 we expanded to the coastal areas here, knowing not in specifics, but knowing all the great work that's being presented today, the great work that you've shared and that you're doing. I think our challenge going forward in 2026 is how do we catalog all of this and share this, not just to maintain our biosphere region status, but to be recognized internationally for the kind of very progressive work that you're doing. The 2016 periodic review was 100 pages, and that was focused just on Channel Islands. So we have a good challenge here because of the great work that's going on in this room, and we look forward to connecting with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We have one question in the chat. What types of habitats are you targeting for burns?
Ooh, that's one of my favorite questions. I think I even know who asked that question. That's a really good question. So historically speaking, and I've heard this in a number of different ways, a lot of Ventura County, and this is like 19,000 years ago, but up until probably 500 years ago, or maybe even more recent than that, our county was largely oak woodland, Quercus agrifolia, our coast live oak, and a few other oak species. The story that I've heard, a squirrel could, I think, go through the entire Santa Clara River watershed in our county, just hopping between oak trees is what I've heard, which obviously is a very lovely image. And so oak trees and oak woodlands are hugely reliant on fire. They're not the only ones. Our shrubland ecosystems are also reliant on fire, though you have to time that very, very well to actually help the ecosystem, because those plants in our shrublands like ceanothus, manzanita, they can get to be very old. They can get to be hundreds of years old. And so if you time it improperly, you can kill the plants before they have a chance to actually go to seed. And what you're trying to do is crack open those seeds and germinate them. So that's a little bit more nuanced and requires really intentional and scientifically based timing. But oak woodlands need fire every 5 to 12 years to be able to fumigate their acorns, to have a decent acorn crop, to be able to fumigate their trees in general, the adult trees, from things like sudden oak death. There is some science that suggests that lack of fire could be at least a contributing cause to sudden oak death, because it is a water mold. And fire would fumigate that with the smoke. So that is considered an implicitly crucial part of oak woodland communities. And then also our perennial grassland communities need fire to restore vigor to the perennial grasses, and also to bring back a lot of our native annual wildflowers, and also our bulbs like wild hyacinth, orchids, lilies, Fire will restore vigor and also sometimes often, pretty much always bring back dormant bulbs. I just saw probably 40 wild hyacinth within like 2 square feet yesterday that came back from a burn. So there are a number of other positive impacts that fire can have on other ecosystems, but I don't want to hold you hostage with my enthusiasm. But good question.
Thanks, Monica. Okay. We touched on Arundo, but one more question just to get it out there. A number of Santa Clara River stakeholders are focused on Arundo removal in the watershed for multiple reasons. One significant reason being a goal or need to reduce floodplain fire risk. To what extent are your partners focused on the significant Arundo problem in the watershed for reducing fire vulnerability?
Great question. So, though this is not particularly connected to the Prescribed Burn Association, and it is tangentially connected to the Wildfire Collaborative, the RCD as an entity is absolutely invested and very active in a number of Arundo removal projects within the Santa Clara River watershed, including up into the upper Santa Clara River in more Santa Clarita area, but also down into the area near one of the United Waters stations on Los Angeles Avenue. And then also in Ventura River, there is one programmatic permit project that would in theory support any of a number of Arundo removal projects within that watershed. That's a great question, and it is something that I think a lot of stewardship organizations throughout the county are very active in. There's a lot of traction with that, which is great. It is necessary work.
Great, thank you so much. Any last questions? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Our last presentation is program updates from NRCS, and that's going to be given by Brooks, Engelhardt, and Jordan Atmore. And they're here in person, so I'll stop screen sharing.
Hey everybody, this is Jordan Atmore from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Just giving a quick update on kind of what we've done in the Santa Clara River watershed recently. One project that really the only one I can think of that's kind of like on the river. We're working with the producer near Fillmore to do some herbaceous weed control and brush management. It's been about 25 acres of mostly Arundo removal. It also includes some other invasives like tamarisk and castor bean. But basically the whole goal of that project was to improve habitat for native riparian forest species and try to return that site to a more historical setting, which include elderberry, mule fat, walnut, willow, sycamores, oaks, and other plants like that. But besides that, a quarter of our customers and then a large majority of Ventura County agriculture happens in the Santa Clara River watershed. And so most of our projects include improving irrigation systems and developing nutrient management budgets and improving irrigation water management to improve the efficiency of irrigation systems and to kind of keep water on the field for people and not let it leach out or run off into surface waters. And then included in that is practices that increase ground cover, like cover crops and mulching, which will increase infiltration and also reduce the runoff, like I said, to keep water in the field and keep our water quality in the Santa Clara watershed, or improve that water quality. And that's basically all we've done. And I just kind of want to point out that we take applications all year round for projects, and then we also you can just give us a call and we're willing to come out and just give technical assistance for any kind of practices or projects that include conserving your natural resources.
Also, we also work with the Ventura County Resource Conservation District too on a number of projects. So sometimes through their funding and federal funding through the NRCS and RCD, those can be used collaboratively on similar projects. So, and we work with the private landowners, and they can be farmers, ranchers, or conservancies. The Santa Clara River being, historically a woodland that fits well within the Farm Bill programs that we administer. So just having, if they're willing landowners or, send them our way or the RCD and we can work with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Any last comments in the in-person room? Okay, and any last comments over Zoom? If you do, feel free to unmute yourself. Great. Thank you all so much for a great meeting today, and we'll look forward to the next one. As always, feel free to reach out to Heidi or me for any questions you have regarding the Santa Clara River Watershed meetings, and have a great afternoon.